terms are the ending. I think there's a disagreement on the definition of the length of time of how long this class lasts. So I assumed we have basically up until 10:30. That is not universally agreed upon. So in the spirit of cooperation and peace, I have usually let it erode to 10:15, and now appears to be eroding further. So I am taking a little bit of a stance in these petty back and forths on it, but I'm tending towards love, grace, and peace rather than rigid definition at this point. We'll see how long that lasts. Attend it with my patience. But there's a party going on here, and caterers are coming in. So those caterers are supposed to arrive somewhere between 10 o'clock and 10:10. Never mind, somebody scheduled it to come in during the class period that's still running. But for the sake of argument, I've basically said when we exit the classroom, we'll go back out and through that door, and our gear will go through there. So if they come in, we're going to continue, but feel free to ignore them if it becomes too distracting, of course. Grab a spoon, get in there. I think they're just putting water in and lighting the sterno. And if you're like me, you want to light the sterno too. So feel free to volunteer to light the sterno. I totally get it. This is my favorite thing to do as a kid. Can I light this on fire? Yes. I have permission to do that? Yes.
We take it out of the sterno container?
Yeah, oh, see, that's that. I have done that as well too, and I can tell you it doesn't work as well when you do that. But depending on what it is you're trying to do, yeah, right. We will be off the next 2 weeks, but nothing prevents us from getting together over that time when time sees fit as smaller groups. So feel free to do that. But we'll be back not the next week, the following week, but the week after that. Okay. What hopefully we can get done here today is to get into the definitions, so that over those 2 weeks, if we want to, think, mull, research, whatever, you've got a couple of weeks and maybe hopefully some downtime with family to do that. And no, Christmas has failed to be enriched by a deep, deep discussion of what is real and what do we mean by existence, right? So if you ever get bored and the presents aren't enough, a deep discussion about existence is always something. Okay. We identified last time that we wanted to define these terms. I didn't talk about it much last time, but I want to talk. I think something popped up last time that is helpful when we talk about definitions. So you'd offered last time as an example operationalization as an alternate term for definition. So if I can quibble with that only a little bit, I would say, but I'll propose to you a method for thinking on when it comes to using terms. What terms are preferable terms to use, which is weird. But if we're trying to put some order on it, is there an order we can put on it? So typically, as I understand it, and as I understand it, and social sciences understand it, operationalization is the process of interacting with the definition in such a way that we can measure it. So it's not the same thing as defining. It's how we operationalize that definition or that word in order to be able to measure it in a scientifically meaningful way. So like my wife is a PhD statistician. When she operationalizes a term, she's saying, here's our term, now what metrics are going to use to apply it, and that process is what she describes as operationalization. She teaches classes on that, and that's the definition of operationalization that she uses in it. So whether that viewpoint is correct or not, forget about it. The question is this, here's a circle, here's another circle. This one is definition, and this one is operationalization. And this could be anything, right? We're gonna talk about two words here and say, what's the correspondence between these two words? So is there for every point, everything in definition, every property in definition, or every idea in that definition, is there an identical property? Can you map them one-to-one? And if so, and if you can map them back and forth, so the mathematician would tell you there's a bijection between them. They say there's a one-to-one and onto relationship with these things. The logician hopefully would say the same. So if everything's the same, if there are no differences at all, then Leibniz tells us that these are identical. We're just using two words for the same thing. If, however, one of these is a proper subset of the other, that operationalization fits under definition, or definition fits in operationalization, then we would say one of them is the more fundamental term. So that in the same way that you might have cats and you might have black cats, they have the same essential properties, but this one's got an additional modifier on it that makes black cats a subset of cats and not the other way around. Cats is not a subset of black cats. So the question then over to you is, do you, in your mind, based on your definition operationalization, what's the relationship between those two?
Operationalization is...
let me say one thing before he gets into it. The reason I'm doing this is this discussion right here will be very, very important when it comes to us doing this term. And the reason that I want to focus on that is I think that existence is I'm going to just throw it out there kind of as a consideration for an axiom, but I'll justify it later, is existence, an existence statement is the most basic statement that you can make at all in philosophy. Is something exists. I am, or I exist, or reality exists. I'll make an argument later that says that which is real exists, or the most basic tautology of all is reality exists. That's the most basic thing that you can. That which is real is really the statement. But that's your first statement at all, and then the decision about what is fundamental is based on this. Can you make a statement without referencing? Can you make a statement about anything else without referencing that statement? If the answer is no, then I'm saying that statement is more basic. Okay, sorry, I apologize for interrupting. I should have said that first.
Operationalization is a description of how you're going to utilize a term for a particular purpose.
Okay.
In scientific investigation.
Great.
It could, in quantitative kinds of investigations, it may be how we're going to measure this term numerically.
Yep.
It's also used in qualitative social science research, and that would be less.
Great. Then thank goodness ladies and gents, we just saved 15 minutes, probably longer. Okay, good. All right, good. We agree on that. Then never mind. I'll skip that, and off we go to my point on, or our next topic, which is we're now going to try to define these terms. So we're going to define these terms, some of which, hopefully all of them, we can come up with a way to operationalize logically. Like how are we going to measure? So if there's a nod to be done to operationalization, is if it's a subset of definition in some way, it is at least one of the most useful subsets, because the discipline of epistemology may just be how we operationalize logic. That is to say, how do we know what's true? What's the measurement system we're going to use to determine whether something's true or accurate or corresponds to reality at all? Okay, I apologize. This is going to be brutally philosophical for the first third of this class, and hopefully we'll get practical in a little bit. But does anybody want to disagree with the idea of if you're measuring two things, if you can refer, you have to be able to refer. One of them will be more fundamental, and the way you know whether it's more fundamental is whether this concept depends on this thing, or whether this concept depends on this thing, or whether they're independent, and then therefore, for all we know, could be on the same level. Does anybody object to that way of thinking? Not yet. Fair enough. A wise reservation, right? Okay.
Yeah, let me see where you go.
Let's see where you go with this. I'm not sure I'm buying what you're selling quite yet. There's no ulterior motive on that one. That's like genuinely, I can't think of any other way to do it than that. So, okay, then I want to basically say whenever we're going to talk about something, we're going to make a statement. And we'll make statements in really two forms. Something like X is or is not Y. And Y may be X in this case. So X is X, you could say something like that, X is Y, in which case it would be trivially true. It would be a tautology. Or you might say X has the property of, or properties of Y, or of kind of blank, right? So X is blank, or X has the property of blank, or of being blank. That when you're making a statement, these are the only two forms of statements that exist, fundamentally. That ultimately every truth claim can be stated in one of these two ways. either X is this way, and so like, and maybe if you want to get, maybe you could say X is the first thing that you would say, but X is real, or X exists, is real is the way that you would say it in an is statement, and X has the property of existing. This backwards E is a symbol for existing, is a way to put it in that latter form. But note that the latter form, the X has the property of Y, that depends on X existing. So the more fundamental of these two claims is X exists, or X is real. Once you have X is real, you'd be like, okay, X is real. It also has a property of this. This became an argument. This actually came up when people were talking about the ontological argument. Specifically, Kant said, this part over here is called a predicate. Kant said, existence is not a predicate. So this argument doesn't work. That was the idea. And then the later guys were like, right, existence isn't a predicate. Necessary existence is a predicate. And we're right back to it. So this is the most fundamental. This is a way of expressing that, maybe. And then this is another way of expressing it, but each of these next steps allow you to add something else to your descriptions. So, you know, whatever you think is fundamental, this is in some way derivative of that, and this is some way derivative of that. But each one of them depends on having another one. Here's what, we're all trained in kind of the world of physics and math a little bit. Your high school physics would be enough for this. But as an example of this, so this is a little more concrete, you can't talk about acceleration without the concept of velocity. Cannot be done. Because acceleration is the rate of change of velocity. If you don't have velocity, you don't have acceleration. Or at least you don't have the concept. Your concept is not expressible. And if you think about, well, what is the concept? It is a change in something. What's the something? It's speed. It's velocity. And then, of course, velocity is a derivative itself, a derivative of position. It's a change in position. So now you say, well, is position derivative of anything? And maybe you conclude position is a fundamental thing. Good. We found a ground for it. That's the F. The F prime is velocity. The F double prime is acceleration. The triple prime is jounce and jerk, and I forget which ones come first. But each one of them requires the previous one to exist, and then one of them is fundamental. And part of our search in philosophy is the search for the fundamental, because you can't understand completely something derivative if you don't understand the thing that it's based on. That seems, haven't justified it here, but intuitively we believe that to be true. All right. Does anybody want to discuss this construct? Agree, disagree, hate and discontent, wild reservations?
So the first two is used for like an identity statement?
Yeah, so to say X exists is I'm claiming kind of the most fundamental thing you can say. It's the prior that's required to talk about X. So if you're going to, let's make a claim, well, yes, so we'll get into how later, but X exists, or Descartes, I think, therefore I am, the I am statement, I exist, is the most fundamental thing. Like he's trying to start and be like, okay, I exist, now what? And he's trying to think, what are the next things?
Doesn't he make, I think, more fundamental than I am?
So he's justifying it, but before he got to I think, therefore I am, he initially was saying, do I exist? Like, I think that I exist. How do I know that? And his logic chain roughly was this. Well, I can doubt that I exist. Right. But in order for me to doubt my own existence, I have to exist in order to doubt. So somebody's doing the doubting. Whoever the somebody is that's doubting, I'm calling that me. So what he should have said is, I doubt, therefore I am. Not should have said. He's Descartes. He should have said whatever he said. Right? It's easier to me if he would have said, I doubt, therefore I am. But when someone says, well, what is doubting? Doubting is a process of thinking. And so he's saying, if I'm thinking, then I'm existing. Because the I statement in there implies somebody's doing the thinking, and I'm that somebody.
I guess some of these statements you can replace with an equal sign.
Yes.
For the same.
Yes.
And some you're saying has the property of.
Yeah. So the equal, that's F prime one, the X is Y. That to me is an equal statement. So like X is Y can be the same thing as X is equal to Y. That's right. So this one, the first one, you can't say X equals.
Right.
Right. So the logician would write this one as exists X. the logician would write the second one as x is equal to y. And the third one would say x, there's a bunch of relationships here, implies y, or x if and only if y, or for all x, there exists a y, or something like that. So all these things are the property attribution kind of statements out there. But this is the most fundamental. This is where you're saying, hey, I think there might be two things, but they may be the same thing as well. How do I go about doing that? And it turns out, Leibniz will tell you, you go down to this level, and you say, are there any properties that x has that y doesn't have, or vice versa? And if you're like, nope, they're all the same, then x and y are the same. X equals y.
So I don't think, though, that your middle statement there, x is y, necessarily is an equal sign. Because
no, I'm saying, you're right. I'm saying if you wanted to express, you can do more with it than that. Yes.
Yeah, and because it needs to be reciprocal, right? If the equal sign says x equals y, but y equals x as well.
Yeah, so x...
And x could be like dogs are barking. Barking aren't dogs. You see what I mean?
Yes, but nobody thinks that the statement R barking can be restated.
Bad grammar.
It can be, yeah. Well, I guess the grammar's fine, but it's not expressed in fundamental logical terms. The way that you would express that is, this dog has the property of barking at the present time. That's what that statement really means.
Sure, but still, that's not a reciprocal statement, meaning that
that's right.
Barkings don't have the property of dogs at this particular.
Well, yeah, it's not an equality.
It's not an equality statement.
That's right.
That's what I'm trying to say.
So let's think of some equality, but that's not an equality language. So you would.
But the way you have it written is.
Yes.
It's a very simple point saying, let's not confuse that x equals y is the same as x equals y, because that's not true.
Right. So if we're going to say something like dogs are animals. All right. So that's that's just another statement.
Animals are not all
animals are not dogs. Right. So you can say, in this case, dog is an animal. What you're really expressing is a dog has the property of being a subset of the group animal. This kind of x equals y is an identity statement where you're saying these are the same thing. So
where if one side just said a dog and the other side just said all the properties that a dog has.
yes. So the equal sign really implies is the same thing as. So the statement a dog is the same thing as an animal is not correct. It is correct that a dog is the same thing as a subset of animals. Yeah, that's right. Your point is correct. And we this is expressed in logical terms where really a lot of the conceptual thinking on it is thinking of things in groups or sets. But those groups are all defined by modifiers. So this is why I like talking in terms of set theory. That's why I like talking in terms of
linguistics call it classes.
Classes, yeah. So and by the way, when set theory ran into trouble, they started breaking out other terms like classes and categories and stuff like that. So von Neumann gets into a non-naive set theory where he has these other categories that he uses specific names for to say they're different than sets. They're classes. So you're right. Anyway, this where you're going to get from f to f prime is when your statement isn't saying x is the same thing as y or is identical to y, but rather x has the property of y. And you have to note the difference between those relationships and express them in appropriate terms. So if you're going to say a dog is an animal, you should say, logically speaking, it is clearer to say a dog is a subset of the group animal, rather than saying dogs are identical to animals. So it is the case that there's a subset in animals that's identical to the set dogs, that there's a one-to-one bijective correspondence between those two. And that so you can make that statement, but it's not linguistically clear to say it in that frame. So in this case, when we're using the term is, I am saying it's meant to be identical to. And if you make a statement is that can also be made in this form, that's a mistake. You need to default to the form that is the most descriptive. So if you can't make the statement properly this way, then you have to make the statement properly this way. And then if you're not adding anything to it, if you're not considering another possible set. So by the way, the practical
just a tautology, it says nothing.
Here's why. The practical function is because you're trying to do the sames and differences thing. This is all about sames and difference. And if you're trying to say X is X the same thing as Y? Or is one the subset of the other? So at the end of your analysis, whatever that analysis is, let's say you conclude X is the same thing as Y, then you stop using the term X or Y, and you just call them all X at that point. You're like, they're identical, it's the same thing. Now we're just going to use one term for it instead of using two terms for it, because using two terms for it is causing confusion. And once you're done with that, this is where you are now. Now you're just saying X is, but now I know that this thing that I was calling X and this thing that I was calling Y, turns out they're the same thing, so my statement X is remains true. Now I'm just clear on it, because I asked the question, is there a difference? And by the way, to get to that point, you're really also only doing this and adding Leibniz's law. X has the property, Y has the property, blah, blah, blah. X has the property, blah, blah, blah. You build the whole list exhaustively, and you say the lists are identical, they're the same thing. Now I can just say, I can make one statement about both of them, because there's not both of them anymore, it's just one.
It's interesting that we're using a word to describe a class at a given level. And when you're trying to equate two things together,
Yep.
we get into problems where one word is at a different level in terms of class and the other word.
Yep.
For example, in the Bible, it'll say all men. And then some theologians will say, well,
all men except for...
Yeah, all men except.
Right.
And they sort of redefine the class level that the term all is relating to. Does that mean the entire population of men, period? Or is it just those that are called, or just those,
Is it the whole set, or is it a subset? Right. And that's why the lack of clarity on that one is what causes confusion. And it causes confusion in theology. It causes confusion in mathematics. And math isn't free of this either. All of these same problems are the same problems in math. They're the same problems in physics. They're the same problems in sociology.
It's not confusion. It's where our bickering comes from.
Yeah, but presumably our bickering comes from confusion. If we're all smart enough and have a good will.
The whole world. When they speak of the whole world back then.
Yeah. Did they mean all of reality? Did they mean all of the planet? Did they mean whatever they thought? Okay. Yep. Good. What else? Surely we're not done with this. Are we buying this? Are we happy with it?
As I said.
All right. Get after it. Okay. I'll continue, but always let's come back to it if necessary. But here's one thing I want to point out. One of the way that we should think. That's a bold description when someone's going to tell you how you should think. Right?
Not the way we normally think.
Not the way we normally think. But also when someone turns around the outside, is like, well, you should think this way. One of your first questions, it should be, maybe you would want to ask the question, why do you think that, and why are you trying to impose that on me? Reasonable question. So what I really want to ask is, everybody in here, can we think of any other way or a better way to do this? And what is this? This is about, if we're going to discover truths, we have to be able to talk about them or express them in some way. We also have to be able to think about them ourselves first. So less about how do we communicate it, more about how do you think about it in your own mind. Is there a better way to think of reality and how to make statements about truth and how to discover truth than starting with this, that this is the foundational way to do it? If there's a better foundational way to do it, let's do that first. Now, it may be the case that as we work our way through this, we say, well, we found another way we might do this, and we evaluate it. But note that we're having to start from here, and we're having to start from here from hopefully good reason, which is we literally can't think of a better way to do it. This seems to make the most sense. So keep that in mind. Be willing to look back at it. But I want to say that this, by the way, is based in our laws of logic. So unless you can say X is X, not both X and not X, and either X, or not X. So these things are the fundamental thing. Like we're taking those for granted. So we have to have bought the law of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle for any of this stuff to work. There are more than these, but these are like the basics. Yeah. And you'll note even that stuff up there that doesn't make sense unless you're assuming those laws of logic as well. So those are the real fundamental ones, and then you can go from there. Okay. Although you might say, when you say X is X, what are you talking about? You're saying X exists. Yes, I'm saying X exists. So there's a little bit of like codependency here, but the fundamental idea is existence, and is this thing the same? Is it different? So if I was going to break logic down to its absolute most basic levels, what is it we're doing here? We're talking about what exists. That's the most basic thing. That's the thing first. And the second thing we're talking about is, if there is more than one thing that exists, how are they the same and how are they different? That's the way our mind works, is that we do that kind of thinking based on what's really an attribution of properties. Like, this thing has this property that thing doesn't. And that is to say, this is a difference between this thing and that thing. Properties that are similar. This thing is like that thing. These are similar. So similar and different are very important. And similar and identical is not the same, by the way. Similar is almost identical, or nearly identical, or close to identical in this way. All right. As if we're happy with that, then we're getting close to one of the four things that we were going to talk about. Whatever happened. Okay, existence. So when we're going to say something exists, what we're really saying is, here are three ways to express that. X exists, or so X is, or reality is, or the universe is, or quantum mechanics is, or the laws of physics are. Those are all expressed that way. Another more expanded way to say it is the universe is all that is real. Okay? So now, of course, what you've just done is set the definition of universe to all that is real. So if it turns out, this is important, because if it turns out that what you mean is the physical universe is all that is real, then you have by definition excluded any non-physical entity from reality. That's important because not everybody, some people don't think there is anything that's non-physical. Some people think that there are things that are non-physical. And so, but you shouldn't disqualify one of the groups by the definition without having agreed upon the definitions. And this is why the definitions are important, and which is why universe is kind of the next thing that we get to. So what was not allowed, by the way, in existence it's not that it's not allowed, it's not a good idea to express the following, to say X, whatever we're talking about, X has the property of existence. Because if you are talking about X, you've already assumed it has the property of existence, so your statement doesn't add anything to it. You might as well say X exists, and X exists, and X exists. It's redundant. There's no need to do it that way. So you've already covered it by saying X exists. The universe, if the universe is all that exists, everything that exists, then you can say the universe is all that exists. And you set that equivalent. See, that's your definition now. And technically, that's what it's supposed to be. One word, verse, one word for everything.
Essentially, we use the word is. In Latin, they use the verb to be.
Yeah.
And what does to be? How do you find that? What do you include in it?
Yeah.
It's
So,
part of to be.
and we would call it the infinitive form of it. Yeah. So, but what's the idea that it's expressing? The idea it's expressing is existence, which is why, like when if you're a kid and
we use the word is.
Well, they use the word est.
But is just part of the conjugation of to be.
Right. Which
Bill Clinton said, what is?
where this is, yeah, so you might have looked back at Hamlet and say, to be or not to be, that is the question. What he's really saying is, do I exist or do I not exist? Should I kill myself or should I continue to exist? So, yes, but the idea is what we're expressing there, it's a difference in form of the verb. The concept is the same, existence. Yes, sir.
It seems to me that if you're, by saying X, you're assuming that that must exist, and you're kind of rolling concepts into your definition as well. So you're almost doing the opposite of what you were talking about a minute ago with using your definition to exclude something. This time we're including something. Because we can talk about things that don't exist physically, like a centaur, something like that. We have a concept of it, so you could say centaurs exist in the sense that they're concepts that we use, but they don't exist in reality as physical entities.
Right. So so he's 100% right, and here's how I would answer that question. Philosophers annoyingly will, when you turn around and you say, "Look, unicorns don't exist," and someone will say, "Well, there's a Keynesian sense in which it does," and you're like, "What do you mean?" And they'll say, like, by that I mean it exists in your mind as a concept, and you'll say, "Okay, fine. Is my mind real? Yes. Is it the case that I have this concept in my mind?" And you might say yes, and say, "Okay, well, if it's real and it exists as a subset of what's in my mind, or exists on the substrate that is my mind, or it's a part of my mind, or it's an object that I'm holding in my mind, then it exists in some real way too, and therefore it exists." Now, by that, we have to test and say, "Oh, hang on a second, not so fast. How do you know whether that concept that you're describing exists? What do you mean by unicorn?" And if somebody says, "Well, by unicorn, I mean a black cup with a lid that contains coffee," you'd be like, "Okay, sorry, clearly we're not talking about the same thing. I'm thinking of a horse with a horn sticking out its head. A spirally horn, always a spirally horn. Why a spirally? Because narwhals, I think, but I don't know. The definition of what a unicorn is has to be laid out. And it turns out that if you lay it out and you say, okay, well, it's the idea of a horse with a spirally horn coming out of its forehead. So we can hold that in our minds. If that was the definition, we can hold that in our minds and then ask another question. This is a very important question. So here's the set of all things that are true out there. Here are all the truths that are true out there. And we need some method of discovering whether those things, whether our concepts of truth are correct. How do we know whether they're even conceiving of truth the right way? So the good news is, the bad news is, we may not agree on the method to detect all of truth. But what we can do is agree on a method to knock out a bunch of statements that are not true. And say that those are not. We can say that anybody who says these are truth claims, this thing is true, X is true, or is equal to true, or has the property of being true. I think has the property of being true is the right way to say it. That there are some claims like that we can knock out. And the claims we can knock out are the ones that are contradictory. If they violate the law of non-contradiction, then we know they're not true. They violate the law of identity. That is to say, if I say a phone is a cup, and we've just defined them both, and they're not they don't have the same list of properties, then we know that's false. If we say, because ultimately, fundamentally, it contains a contradiction. This has this property, that has a different property, and they're not the same properties. Okay, so if that's correct, then finding a contradiction in a concept is a way to show that the concept does not exist. That is to say, you think you're talking about this thing, but you don't. The favorite hobby horse here is a square circle. So somebody will say, yeah, a square circle exists. I have a concept of a square circle in my head. And, in their head, they may be thinking of something like this, right? It has some properties of being square, it has some properties of being circular. But when you say, okay, what's the definition of a circle, of a square? And someone defines it, and they basically do a list of properties, and they say it has 4 vertices, it has 4 sides, it has the angles are all equal to 90 degrees each. They add up to 360, all those kinds of things. And so you list out these properties, and then you say, well, what's a circle? And you say it's all the points, single distance from a given midpoint or center point. And if you ask some question that say, all points some distance x from r, from some distance r from center point, and you say, okay, well, does this list have any? Does it have any sides to it? You can say, well, maybe it has one side or two sides if you like both sides of the line, but it certainly doesn't have four sides. Okay, well, does it have any corners? Does it have any vertices? What's a vertex? What's a corner? Here's what a corner is. No, it doesn't have any of those. Or it has an infinite number of those, depending on how you define it. Does it have any angles that are 90 degrees? Like, no, it has no angles that are 90 degrees. So soon you realize that there's not a correspondence between these two things. So to say something, in fact, some of them are contradictory. This one, it turns out, if you ask the question of the circle, does it have any corners? The circle has no corners. And because this has no corners and this says it has four corners, this is a contradiction. So a circle that is square, a square that is circle, that is not. It turns out as you think of it like that, you say, oh, okay, well, this isn't a square circle. All right, then what's left? What else you got in your head that is a square circle? And as you think through it, you realize I don't have a concept that has all the properties of a square and all the properties of a circle. Therefore, my assertion that this concept that I have is both a square and a circle, but that can't possibly be true because it would necessarily contain a contradiction based on my definitions of square and circle.
Typically, when we use the phrase square circle, which we do use, and it has meaning when we use it, so it must be a concept, what we're using it for is to describe something that is impossible, right? So we're not, the concept isn't that thing that you wrote there. The concept is broader than that. To me, the meaning of a word is its use in the language. So how do we use the idea of a square circle? We use it to describe something else that's impossible.
Okay, what's the something else we're describing?
I mean, it could be
anything that's impossible, right?
Right, anything that's self-contradictory, for example.
Okay.
So it's like a paradigmatic example of something self-contradictory.
Well, what I mean is that I agree with you.
The concept exists.
Well, Will, I agree with you, but I'm saying if somebody made the claim, a square circle exists, and when you say, what do you mean by square circle? They mean impossibilities exist, or the idea of impossibility exists. That's what I mean by that. Oh, okay. Or there's a way of expressing that something is impossible. That a square circle is a subset of that. There are many ways of expressing that something is impossible.
Right,
a square circle is one of those ways.
Right. My only point is that when we talk about concepts, you have to look at examples and you have to look at how it's used because it's not as clear cut as a geometrical shape sometimes when you're talking about these things.
So I do think it's useful there, but I disagree with you about that, and I disagree with, if you think that's what Wittgenstein says, I disagree with that too. So it is not okay in my mind to say Wittgenstein says it, therefore it's true.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay,
There are a lot of things I disagree with Wittgenstein on.
Okay, then this is an example, and that's an example, and that's an example. Okay, let's say these are three examples of how things are used in language. How are we going to figure out if those examples are the same?
We determine if how they're used in our language.
Okay, and how are we going to determine how they're used?
Which is something that's kind of a basic, fundamental. There's no real way to measure it other than being fluent in the language and knowing how it's used.
Okay, but let's say.
And giving examples.
Okay, so but right, we just define things circularly by saying the way that we determine whether something is an example is that we use examples.
You come to a ground point at some level.
Okay, but let's say that I want that in language we say it's raining cats and dogs. And dogs. So we say that this is a concept that must exist. Okay? And then we say, well, what does the term raining mean? What does the term cats mean? And what does the term dogs mean? Okay? And if we turn around and we say, well, raining, there's an example of raining. And what we mean by that is it falls from the sky. Water that falls from the sky. From sky, yep. That's what raining means. And that cats is, felines. And dogs is canines, animals. whatever. And so when we say it's raining cats and dogs, we're like, okay, got it. We have examples of what cats means, and cats means these furry things in almost all of our examples. But we have different ones. We also say other things are cats, of like, hey, you cats doing okay today? And by that I mean people. Okay, so at some point, even in our examples, we have to differentiate, we have to define what we mean by the words.
It's metaphorical
But,
language.
I mean, you trying to do that, I think, demonstrates how unuseful that is, right? Like, because we're not talking about felines or canines. This is an idiom. It's a phrase, and you get the meaning by looking at how it's used in language. And what it means is that it's raining very hard, right? And you can't come to that understanding by defining the individual elements of the phrase.
But you can so as an example, when if you have somebody from another culture and language come in and someone says in front of them, it's raining cats and dogs. And their question was there an explosion at the animal shelter? And then you go about explaining it. They'll say, my understanding of cats and dogs are these things. And you say, yes, I'm not using the word by that definition. I'm using the entire group of words to represent something that, by the way, it has nothing to do with either cats or dogs. Right? So the concept of cat, if I give you that in isolation, and the concept of dog that I give you in isolation, and the combination of those things if I give you in isolation, and the concept of raining if I give you in isolation, in none of those do you come up with the idea of it raining very heavily. It's only when you use it idiomatically and in a way that's not consistent with its definition that it means these things. But somebody had to supply that definition. And when we look for, like, we ask this question, where did that term come from? Right? Why do we ask the question, where did that term come from?
It doesn't make sense otherwise.
Because it doesn't make sense on its face.
Yeah.
So we then turn around and find out, here was the history of where that idiom came from. And so even though it uses these words, it means something different. This is an example of equivocation. Equivocation is the logical fallacy of using two different terms to mean the same thing, when in fact they express two separate concepts. So we agree. So I'll ask you this question at a minimum.
But it's not a fallacy to use this phrase. It's just a part of our language. And
It's
you
a
can't
fallacy.
You can't understand it by breaking down its components.
I didn't say it. You can understand it by breaking it down, and watch this. Here's how we're going to do it. Okay? Okay? Here, I'm not even going to bother to draw the dog, okay? But these are two different concepts. One concept is it's raining very heavily, and the other concept is animals falling from the sky. Those concepts are not the same, right? You can hold those concepts in your head, and I'm asking you, are they the same?
No.
Okay. So that means there's actually two concepts, at least.
Possibly. Yeah.
No, not possibly, certainly. You just said they were different.
But we can create that concept. But when someone tells me it's raining cats and dogs, maybe the first time I heard the term, I thought of that.
Yes.
But generally, that's not the concept that enters my mind. I think it's raining very hard.
Yes. Now you think it's raining very
So,
hard.
I mean, with any phrase, you could make new concepts out of it.
The point is, the way that we figured out what we meant was by making these definitions, by recognizing the definitions. We recognize that by using the definitions fundamentally the way that they're normally defined, that this is the concept that emerges. And that what we have to do then is say, even though that's what you think of when I say it's raining cats and dogs, that's not what I mean. Instead, I mean this other thing. So what I'm going to do is take the phrase, it's raining cats and dogs, and act like it's a new word. And that new word means heavily. Right? So we have another word for raining cats and dogs, or cats and dogs in this case. It's heavily. And so heavily and cats and dogs are identical in this case. They're the adjective that modifies it, the adverb that modifies raining. Raining a participle? Whatever. They're the modifying word, and we're saying that those are the same in this case, that heavily and cats and dogs are identical in this case. Now separately, when we use them else, we had to do a lot of explaining to get there because cats and dogs doesn't equal heavily for us. So someone has to it's a trick of English. It's an idiom that arose because of this book somewhere. It was a funny book written by a creative guy. Like, it takes a lot of explanation, but the very simple, definitionally derivative way of thinking of it is this, which is why you thought that as a kid. Because the definition, because you were thinking definitional.
And when Am I the only one here that's thinking about the Thanksgiving special of WKRP?
Yeah.
No, you're not. There's a whole other table over there that totally gets what's happening. And there's a table over here that's like, okay,
What is
okay,
that?
old guy. Yeah, right. So,
So did we say unicorns are real or unicorns exist?
so the
So here's the
concept,
question
so the
about-
question is this, are there concepts that are real? Are concepts real? Are
Right.
thoughts real?
That's the question. Can you separate concepts from the content of it? So are we saying that, obviously unicorns aren't real because it refers to a material object, and that material object is not real, but the concept is still a real concept?
Okay, so I want
You know what I
to,
mean?
that's two, I think these are really two good questions. Let's break the two questions out. The first question is, are all concepts real? Or are all claimed concepts real? So we're easy on the physical side, right? If someone's like, these physical concepts, not all physical concepts are real. What do you mean by that? I mean that, like, it may be the case, it's probably the case that there are no unicorns, physical unicorns, right?
Is it real?
I mean, maybe there are, but like, let's say that we had a godlike ability to see everything, and it turns out that as we look across all physical objects, there are no horses with horns coming out of their heads. So we could make the statement, there are no unicorns. Unicorns are not real. What they mean is unicorns do not exist in the physical reality. But we had a physical modifier on there that said in the physical world they exist. But what about the mental world?
Yeah.
Are the concepts in our mind real concepts? Now, what I'm trying to say is,
You have to,
some of the things that we claim are real, are concepts, are not in fact concepts. And I'm going to appeal to the Sicilian from inconceivable. So are there things that are inconceivable? Or to use Will's word, which is the same, impossible.
That's what you do with the square
How
circle.
could we ever get there?
You can conceive of a square circle or say those words, but when you break them down into their mathematical geometric definitions, you can't make them
fit.
Right.
So here's my point. If the person says, look, I have a concept of a square circle. What is a concept? A concept is an object, we use that term for lack of a better one, in my mind. Okay, or an idea in my mind. Okay, tell me about your idea. My idea is of a square circle. Right? Can you just, that sounds like a geometric figure. Is your idea a geometric figure? Yes, it is a geometric figure. Okay. So we might say it this way. What do you picture? What is this concept? Describe your concept to me. And what I'm saying is, when you make the person describe the concept of the square circle, you'll eventually come to Will's point, which is, what you're describing, brother, is not possible. And what we mean by not possible is, when you say circle and you say square, those are not what you mean when you say square circle. So if the person ends up saying, well, my idea of a square circle is this thing, then someone's going to say that neither has the properties of all the properties of a square, nor does it have all the properties of a circle.
however, that goes back to my question, right? Because a square circle is referring to something in the physical world.
No. It could refer to only a mental concept. Like you can have right now.
Regardless of what, you can find contradiction, but does that mean the concept of what that person is thinking is not real?
Yeah, so it
You see
doesn't
what
mean.
I'm trying to say?
No, but let me get
I'm
through
trying
that.
to separate the
I got it,
idea.
but I'm trying to explain that part here. So here's my explanation of that. If this
I mean, it could
is
be a
in their,
contradictory concept.
what I'm saying is, if this is in their
Concept.
thought bubble right here, okay, that's what they're thinking of. That's the concept.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the concept. They use the word square and circle to describe that, but it doesn't have. It is not a square circle,
Square with rounded
right?
corners.
It is a rounded square,
Sort
Yeah.
of square.
right? But it's not. There's nothing in here that is circle,
Right.
right?
You
There's
just define a square circle
So-
as that, and say, when we talk about square circles,
Yes.
that's what I mean.
great. Now, if what you're going to say is, okay, is that a good definition?
So it would be a false concept.
So-
If we have a particular reason to define it that way.
Great. Now, it turns. So when we have this kind of deal, and let's say that we've got a circle, right? Oh gosh, that's terrible. My point depends on me being more accurate than I'm gonna. Oh,
Wow.
forget about it.
Yeah.
This is really hard to draw on this
Just
thing.
move the pen before that's about it.
Okay, gosh.
Use a coffee cup.
Thank you. I'm
Put
gonna
a
do that.
stem coming out of it that way.
No, I have a square circle.
So
All right,
That would be
pretend
false.
that's round,
That's
okay?
well done.
Pretend that's round, pretend that's
again,
round.
that would be a false concept, but that doesn't mean the concept.
Wait for it,
itself
wait for it, wait for it, wait
is
for it.
not real.
When we do the, Scott, when we end up doing this right here, and we say, we have a circle, this is my definition of a circle, and then I draw one like that. Let's pretend that this one was an ellipse, which it's not. Let's pretend it's an ellipse. What we can do is turn around and say, the concept, these two concepts differ, and they differ in a very particular way. This one has a single midpoint, and everything's the same. Every point on the circle is the same length. These have two foci, and there's this relationship between the two of them for every point on the ellipse. Okay. So when we have a confusion about it, our concepts, what we do is we talk about the concept until what becomes clear. What's the most important thing when you're talking about what's potentially two concepts for figuring out if they're actually two concepts? What differs? What differs between the two of them? In this case, one reference point versus two reference points. Or we may have a property of this one is oblate, and this one is not oblate. Okay, or something like that. So to say that we can express a concept and therefore it exists, that's not enough. You have to examine the concept and say, have I come up with this concept before? Is it the same concept? I'm just using a new word for it. Or alternately, what are the differences between my concept and my new concept and the other concept?
So
The patent office recognizes this, right? They will, in fact, money flows off of this thing. If your patent doesn't differ from somebody else's patent beforehand enough, then those differences matter, and they matter in monetary terms. Yeah.
So just those two words, real and concept, to use the word real to apply to a concept that has no substance to it.
Yep.
I think if we want to keep real usable,
Real.
sorry, wasn't then it needs to, we need to sort of maybe limit what it refers to. And if we say it refers to a concept, especially a concept that is inconceivable,
Inconceivable,
that can't be conceived.
So here's the point
This
is,
goes down-
wait,
back to my-
hold on, this is very important. Wait,
Yeah, but you didn't.
here's a concept.
Yeah. We're still on the question.
Hold
I
on,
asked.
wait for it. Here's a concept, he just said it, and here it is, it's inconceivable. What's the problem here? Somebody tell me. What's inconceivable mean?
Not able to be thought of.
Not a concept. Okay.
So here in the
What
line-
law do we violate there?
Is it true?
Law of non-contradiction.
So here's the problem, right? And this is what I was trying to say before. What you showed is that a concept could be false, but that doesn't say whether or not the concept itself is real in the broader picture. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can, like, I'm conceiving of a unicorn. I'm conceiving of a round circle. My definition may be false, but does that mean that concept is not real?
If
You understand what I'm trying to say?
I do understand
and
what
all
I'm
you
trying-
showed was, well, the concept has a contradiction, and therefore the physical reality of what you're trying to say or what you have in your mind is not the same. But that doesn't mean that the concept doesn't exist.
what I'm saying is,
So I'm just asking the question.
yeah, so this is the point I'm trying to get across, and I've missed. So I'll try again, and I'm not describing it well, so let me try again.
Yeah.
That's the concept you've got in your head.
Yeah.
Okay? Is that thing a square?
No.
Is that thing a circle?
No.
Okay, so when we say it is a square circle, then the problem is that's wrong. Our statement is wrong.
Correct. It's a false concept.
It's a false statement.
It's a false statement of the concept I have in my
It's a
mind.
false statement that says the concepts of square and circle
Yeah.
are compatible with being this figure.
Right.
That's the false statement. So what's your right answer there is like, no, you've got a concept, but we now agree your concept is not a square circle. What is your concept?
Yeah, right.
And they're like, well, it's a rounded figure. Okay, great. We'll call the rounded figure
So that's irrelevant to the question of if the concept is real.
Well, you can call it a square circle, but the problem is it's the same. When you do that, you're using a term that is used commonly in language, and its examples are not compatible. Those concepts are not compatible.
So you're operationalizing it, you're calling it that for a particular purpose.
And the operationalization that we're going to use is, how are we measuring whether something's true? We're going to operationalize it by saying if it violates the law of non-contradiction, we ought not use it. And here's what I mean, is because we do this all the time in academic disciplines, right? We're very rigorous about what our terms mean. You don't get to just turn around and willy-nilly make idiomatic expressions in an academic paper, and basically it's raining cats and dogs in the Amazon, therefore we know that the number of mammals in the Amazon must be very high. Like, you get eviscerated for writing that, right? So we agree with the definitions on it. So, and I know you're not saying that, but so operationalization in this case, yeah, what we're going to use is these laws of logic to say whether that's the case. And as we operationalize the way that we're going to define terms like square circle, we're going to say something like, if your concepts contradict each other, then it's not allowed. Our operationalization says that method is not allowed to be. Our metric is using the law of non-contradiction to say that's not a good way to express truth.
So that you're absolutely right. It still doesn't answer my question, which was, I can conceive, I'm going to say, no I can't, but I'm going to say, I can conceive of a married bachelor, right? Okay. Now, obviously, I have something in my head that logically is inconsistent to what I'm saying.
So let's do it.
Hold on, let me finish.
Yeah, okay.
So, regardless of whether what I'm thinking of is logically consistent or it's not, I still have something in my head. And is that something in my mind real or not?
I understand, but my point, I got it. But this is the very important part.
Yeah.
What you have in your head is not actually a married bachelor.
I agree.
Okay, but wait, stop. That's all. Done. Done. That's it. That's all we need to do is when the person says, I'm conceiving of a married bachelor, if I say, well, what you're conceiving of is not really a married bachelor, and you're like, agreed, then guess what? That statement's false. We don't have to go any further.
I completely agree with you. However, are you telling that person, I'm sorry, you're telling me you've got a concept, but you don't. You have no reality in your mind right now.
Well, what we're going to say is, so let's say they have let's say that they weren't, that it's either the case that they had nothing on their mind, in which case what they said was, I'm holding the concept of a married bachelor in my mind, that they were lying, and that they know that. Or ultimately, they had a concept of something else. And what your job is then to do is to say, the something else that you have in your mind as a concept is not the same thing as a married bachelor.
That's completely fine.
So you need a new word to describe whatever that concept is. Yeah.
I still don't think you understand my question, because I'm asking, can you separate a concept from the substance of that concept? Do you understand what I mean? I'm still, regardless of what you say, of the reality of what I'm trying to describe, there is something going on inside my mind.
Yes.
And is that something going on inside my mind, that concept, is that real? Irregardless of whether it's inconsistent, contradictory, uses different words, whatever. Do you understand?
I understand, but what we're trying to, the point that we're trying to make doesn't have to do with determining whether the concept in your mind exists. That's not what we're trying to do here.
So I think it's important. Here's why.
Hold on. Just forget that. I'm asking you. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying what we're talking about is not that. So I'm not talking about whether concepts. I'm not talking about whether mental concepts are real. I'm not. Yeah, exactly. I'm not talking about whether mental concepts are real. I am not talking about whether mental concepts are real. I'm talking about how we know, assuming they are real. If we assume mental concepts exist, how we know whether they are what is being described.
I agree that's what you're discussing. However, and Will can correct me if I'm wrong, I thought that precisely Will's question was, are concepts real?
It may
Because
be.
we're talking about existence.
That may be
Are we
Will's.
not?
That may be Will's question. But what I'm saying is, in the question of are concepts real? So here's a bunch of candidates, and these are concepts. So you've already assumed that concepts exist by asking the question. Are concepts real? So the first question is, do concepts even exist? Period.
And that is the question, because this is, and the reason it's important is
Okay.
when we talk about the term exists.
Okay, but wait, no, that's all right. Forget it. The question is, are concepts real? And if we assume they're real, what I'm saying, or we don't know if they're real. Let's say that we, fine, if you want, let's say we don't know. What we can at least say is, there are some concepts that do not exist. Okay, we did this. This is what we were trying to describe. We did this over here. There are some concepts that do not exist. How do we know which ones don't exist? They're the ones that contain contradictions. Now, it may be the case. It may be the case that all concepts. It may be the case that all concepts don't exist.
Do you mean statements?
Nope, I mean concepts. It may be the case that all concepts don't exist. It may be the case that they all don't exist. It may be the case that many exist. But the ones that we know that things that are called concepts that do not exist are things that contain contradictions. So what I'm pointing out
I'm asking, is that true?
Is
I'm
what
not
true?
convinced it is.
Is what true?
Are contradictory concepts not true?
No,
Because-
self,
or
not
do
contradictory,
exist?
self-contradictory concepts.
If self-contradictory concepts is the content, because the content of that concept is contradictory, does the concept not exist?
Yes. Yes,
And
that's what we're
you're
saying.
trying to say is yes,
Yes.
and I'm asking, really?
But
Yes.
you
Is that
have
true?
to, it has to be there for you to prove that it's contradictory, self-contradictory.
No, it doesn't. What has to, in order, it has to not be there for you to prove that it doesn't exist. Right? So if you're going to prove something that doesn't exist, it literally has to not be there because you're saying it's not there. If it was there in the first place, you lose.
So,
Like you, right? You're gone. You're done because it exists, and you're trying to prove it doesn't exist. The question is, how do we prove something doesn't exist?
But we're back to exists and maybe is valid.
I'm so optimistic and wrong every time about what we're going to get done in a particular class.
Were you a third of the way through the class yet?
This was my worry about trying to define all of these terms.
Yes.
We've gone through the whole hour. We haven't finished with one of the 4 terms, and that's because it's existence. Heidegger wrote a 600-page book called Being in Time.
Yep.
Sartre wrote a 600-page book called Being in Nothingness.
Yep.
Existence is literally, it's called ontology. It's a branch of philosophy.
Yep.
So we're trying
talk
to
about it in here?
solve an entire branch of philosophy. I would suggest that maybe we try to operationalize the term universe and just say it's the physical reality in which everything else exists, whether they be concepts or other physical objects. You know, we don't have to solve that question because it's to some degree irresolvable, but we can say when we talk about the universe, we're talking about everything that's physical and possibly concepts if they exist.
So I'm doing a bad job here, and I'll try to repair it. We're not trying to figure out whether things exist. Let me correct
Trying
that.
to figure out the universe.
We're not trying to figure out if all things that we can conceive of exist. We're not even really trying to figure out the fundamental nature of reality. We're not trying to talk about ontology as a base thing. What I'm trying to do is say in a universe this big, in a set of possibilities this big, that I'm zooming in on it that's the max I can zoom to, and that little dot right there is something that we can say that does not exist. So I don't know all of existence. I don't know all of the kinds of modes and types of reality. I don't know whether they're parallel universes. I don't even know what parallel universes mean. I'm not even there yet. Okay? All I'm trying to say is that little dot right there are things that we know for a fact can't possibly be part of reality.
Sure.
And the reason that we know that,
Is that the human reference?
and the reason that we know that is those are things that contain self-contradictions. They violate the only 3 laws. Like if we're going to think about anything at all, if we're going to do any thinking on all of this stuff, we have to recognize we have to recognize the fact that we may not be able to talk about all those things, but we can talk about this right here and say, well, we can at least take that off the table. So I'm less pessimistic about about you that we can get to the definition here, but I'll say this. If we can't agree on what, oh gosh, I've lost it from trying to have perspective. If we can't agree on what these words mean, then we are wasting our time talking about it.
We can agree on how to use them in this context.
And
so
how to use them,
I gave
of course.
a proposal for how we can talk about the existence of the universe.
We can when we talk about how we use them, we have to talk about their kind of correspondence to reality, because what we're talking about is what is real and what is not.
We don't have to talk about that in all of its aspects. We are trying to use it for a particular purpose. We're trying to figure out, does the universe exist? Did it come to be?
Yep.
At some particular point in time.
Yep.
So I suggest we use that term.
He's
Use the term universe to mean all of physical reality and concepts if they do exist.
Yes. Yes.
And I think we could move on from there, and we don't have to delve into Heidegger and Sartre
And I don't want to.
Commentators.
But what I'm going to say is, even for Heidegger and Sartre, etc., the idea is this: a operation that works across all of that philosophy, all of it, is if something is impossible, then it is not possible. If it is not possible, then it does not exist.
Sure, I think they'll agree on that.
Okay, so in that sense, when we're talking about things that exist, if we want to talk about concepts, if we can show a concept is impossible, then it does not exist. This is going to be very important because some of the concepts that are being brought up, that are going to be brought up in this argument, are things that are impossible. And so what we can do is say, like, nope, that can't be the answer because it's not possible. That's the idea. Yeah, come on in, please. Keep coming.
The problem is we have to move the tables over where.
Yeah, go ahead. By all means, move them. No worries at all.
Well, the equipment's in the way.
Yeah, we can move the equipment. It doesn't have to be here. We're moving that.
Next week.
Yeah. So, well, not next week and not the week after that, but in 3 weeks. Yeah. So, if what I can summarize here is this: in our discussion, in what we're trying to get to, the concept that I'm trying to get across is that there are concepts, and that the way that we can say at least some concepts are false are concepts that the concepts that can't possibly be the answer are things that contain self-contradiction. And hopefully if we've established anything in here through this hour of discussion, it's this: surely we agree that raining cats and dogs, that those are two different concepts, at least two concepts exist and they're not identical. Okay, so anybody who says raining cats and dogs means both have raining heavily and this, and those are the same concept, that's obviously wrong. It's obviously wrong to say that those two concepts are one. By the same token, anybody who says there's a square circle, and what they mean by that is a third thing rather than these two things that are combined and preserve all of those concepts, that's also wrong. And that's why a square circle is impossible. That's why a married bachelor is impossible. It's because at the end of the day, in our minds, there are at least two concepts for them. And that's the idea behind it. So the concept of existence is something that is not impossible at a minimum. There may be more to it than that, but it's not impossible. And that operation alone is the point. That was the point of doing this discussion. So if we agree on that, then we agree. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. Have fun thinking about this. And thank you very much. God be with you. Thank you. You bet.